Hello everyone, my name is Gracie and welcome to the start of a new series. We're going to be taking a look at Rogue Lords, which as you probably have guessed, is in fact a dark fantasy roguelite. In this game, you play as the devil, yes, the devil himself, and you lead your disciples to corrupt and conquer the mortals of Earth. The world in which you play is very European, Western European, sort of got some Transylvanian sort of vibes to it. You'll come up against a lot of priests and mercenaries and peasants and sort of like vampire hunters and that kind of like theme and aesthetic of characters. And instead of using sort of standard minions as you might expect to use in a lot of games, a lot of the other games that I actually play on my channel, this game you use the creatures of legend. So for instance, your starting party that you're going to have is the Headless Horseman, Dracula, and Bloody Mary. And it's fantastic. I will admit that I was a little bit turned off to the idea of having sort of characters that I couldn't really assign any of my own sort of personality to, but I think it works really well, and the characters are actually, from what I've seen, are very well done, and they do feel like themselves, or at least the version of those characters that this game wanted to present to you. It's really, really neat, and I'll show you some of that when we get into some of the menus. So this game was developed by, and forgive my pronunciation, Lake Here Studio and Cyanide Studio. So they both developed this game, and it was published by Nacon. Now, this game is not a card battler, despite what you might think, like most of these roguelite games are lately, and those games are great, but this one uses a system more akin to kind of like Darkest Dungeon or Errata's Lord of the Dead, where you have a variety of characters and they have different skills on their bar that they can use. However, this one is a little bit different because there is an action economy where you have these, it's typically 5 action points, and you share those across your characters. So you can have a turn where a single character uses every single action point you have, or you can have a turn where everybody is sort of alternating back and forth doing, cheaper actions. There's a really interesting cooldown system where you have to refresh your skills using certain abilities that also give you other benefits. So it's really, really cool. And there are unique mechanics for each character. Not dramatically unique, but they do all have a little bit of something that makes them different from the rest. The way that you use skills and upgrade the skills is actually fairly unique, and we'll show that when we get into the menus and sort of the upgrading the combat and stuff like that. But essentially what you need to know is that the character's skills, they have a certain number of slots for those skills, and you can even have duplicates, and you can also get enough duplicates of a skill that it upgrades into a better version. So there's sort of different interesting ways you can play with that. You could have multiple cheap copies of a skill, or upgrade it but only have one version of it now, or something like that. Rogue Lords also has artifacts, like a lot of these games do, so sort of unique pieces of equipment that change a lot of the ways that you play the game, and fortunately this game, a lot of those artifacts are actually quite interesting and can be dramatic. There are games that I've played, such as For the Warp, where the equipment pieces are really just buffs. There's nothing really off the wall or atypical about any of them, and that can work fine for certain games. In this game, you can find artifacts that have positives and negatives. You can find ones that change the way a particular character functions by giving them more damage when certain criteria are met, and then combo that with another artifact. There's a lot more going on with the artifacts than in some other games, which is really great. There are also social events, and each of your characters has different stats involving social things, like their ruse and their occultism and the fear that they generate. So you may have different events where it's recommended you take in somebody who's very scary, and then you want to scare a peasant into doing something for you. And then you can get these positive and negative traits. You can get positive and negative outcomes. You can get more currency, more artifacts, more skills, all sorts of good stuff like that. And the very Hang on, we're pausing while Calvin's yelling. This game has sort of your typical dark fantasy music and sound effects. They're okay. They're not bad, but they're not crazy interesting to me. The visuals, however, do have some really interesting things going on to them. I think that the world map that you run around on not so much. It's cool, but it doesn't really do much for me. The combat is actually quite great. The unit models are really great, and some of them are very interesting, especially like the human like priests of their religion that come to battle you. They can be quite kind of unsettling looking, really. And the combat animations are pretty good, and the character art is I think is quite compelling, actually, especially for certain characters like Bloody Mary. Is really quite compelling, I think, in her, the way that they decided to portray her. So let's head on in. So I have this save slot here going. Now this is your sort of like little home base area.
Retraces the entire history of the world and of hell, with a single exception. My defeat 10 years ago. I intend to erase that aberration from history forever.
The Devil 10 has a lot of things to say. That is actually one of the pros of this game. There's a lot of voice acting, which is really fantastic. It's very cheesy, so strap yourselves in. For your cheeseometer is going to be quite high, but it is pretty special that they got some pretty good voice acting, honestly. I would say that other pros of the game are the visuals are mostly a pro. I like how there are different ways to build each of the characters, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And I like the devil mechanic, which is one of the most interesting things I've seen in a game like this. I can't wait to show you what that is, but there's essentially, because you're the devil, there's a way for you to just cheat. And it feels really cool to do that, and I'll show you how to do that. It's really quite fun. Cons for the game, I would say, would include the combat difficulty. The tutorial is stupid easy. You will get through the tutorial with no trouble. And then you will start your first run, and everything will be going hunky-dory, and suddenly you'll feel like you cannot keep up with enemies.
I don't even remember who all these skulls belong to. Mortals who tried to defy me. Disciples who betrayed me. It doesn't matter anymore.
Thank you, Devil. Thank you for the periodic interruptions. There are a lot of skulls in this room, actually. I just noticed the ones up here in the walls. That's kind of weird. Other cons would be the devil mechanic that I can't wait to tell you about is really, really fun, but it seems like the game is balanced around you sort of needing to use it, so it kind of takes some of the wow and power out of it when you have to do it to survive. And then enemies, they get so tough that you don't feel like you're controlling cool creatures out of Legend. You feel like you're fighting them because the enemies get really powerful. They've got just a huge amount of health, and they've got all these cool skills and AoE and that kind of stuff, and you're just like pinging them down slowly. Like you don't feel like you're a legendary creature like Dracula. So that is definitely a downside to the game, but I think that's just the nature of a game like this where you want to be able to have boss fights and challenges and stuff like that. So over here,
this well of flames
hang on a second,
reaches directly to the center of the earth. Anything I throw into it is destroyed forever, including condemned souls.
Thank you, Devil. Thank you for pointing that out.
Oh. That reprobate Van Helsing. Not only did he humiliate me, he deprived me of my powers.
Yeah, he's he turned up the cheese to 11 when he did this voice acting. I don't know who this person is. I should look that up and put it in the description. But it's very good, but it's very cheesy. So in here you can see all sorts of cool stuff. You can see the levels of my player level, achievements that I've unlocked, my statistics, and like artifacts. I don't want to spend too much time in there. I don't want to like give away too many spoilery things. This is your wall of like characters.
The more I spread terror, the more my disciples will gather around me. I must continue.
So these are the disciples. These are not ordinary minions. These are named characters out of Legend that are very powerful. And you can see that there's 5 more that I haven't unlocked. You start with these 3. Bloody Mary, who's my favorite of them. Dracula, the Headless Horseman, who I like how his portrait is conveniently ripped enough that even if he had a head, you wouldn't be able to see most of it. That's pretty cool. And then I just got the White Lady. So I'm probably going to take her in because I don't know how she plays, and I think that looks really cool. She puts masks on that like do different stuff to people, so that's pretty cool. Bloody Mary is the one that I think is the most visually interesting so far.
Mary. She spent so much time gazing into her mirrors that she's lost touch with reality. She lives in her own world now, a world where murder is the most amusing game of all.
So she is so cool. I absolutely love the way they drew her, and her weapon is like a bloody piece of glass that she stabs enemies with. It sounds gruesome, but the art style is just cartoony enough that it doesn't come across as too horrifying. But that is what she does. I mean, she's got stabbing, blade, cursed mirror. So she is really interesting, but she tends to be quite strong, like a little bit stronger than the others, but she's got this bloodthirst that makes it so, like this skill, for instance, says bloodthirsty right here on the skill, and that means this can only target the adversary with the least HP. So she gets like tunnel vision on weakened enemies and just wants to stab them. So it's hard to strategize with her sometimes, because some of her powerful skills are she can only attack the enemies that are already weakened, but she's great at finishing them off, that's for sure. So let's go on into a run, and we'll talk about how all the characters are going to work, what the map is like and all that. So we click on here. So this is the quest that I'm on. I have not completed the first of, I think there are like 6 quests, and they're called books. Like the book is like a story that's being told, and in it there are different chapters that you have to complete. It's just sort of a roundabout way of saying a mission. This is a mission, and there are like objectives.
The claw of Geryon, cut from the creature of the same name, drives out all inspiration from anyone who enters into contact with it. It is thus an object that humans consider to be cursed, and they do not keep it for long. Finding it will not be easy. My informers on Earth heard talk of a poet lacking inspiration who had received a visit from the Sanctuary Lumen. My disciples will begin there.
So the Sanctuary Lumen is one of the main adversaries that you have in this game as the devil with your disciples. There are 2 main adversaries. There's the Sanctuary Lumen. This is the church, the priesthood, and they sort of train their followers in like magic and holy protections and that kind of combat and stuff, so they can defend off the disciples of the devil, as well as like any other dark creatures roaming around. The other one is the like Van Helsing and the other like demon hunter type characters. So there's a bunch of those people roaming around, and Van Helsing himself. So those are your main enemies you're going to fight. There are like some other things that you'll fight, but a lot of them are going to be like bounty hunters and priests and that kind of stuff. So here, we're just going to go on normal difficulty. I'm having enough trouble as it is with this game. So let me pick my disciples. I think I want to put in the White Lady. Random. Oh, that's a cool idea. I think I'll put in the White Lady instead of Dracula. Dracula's fine, but I think he's the most basic character, so I'm going to use somebody more interesting. So I'm going to take this character who you'll see specializes in a particular type of damage. The Headless Horseman serves as sort of a tank who gets really upset and angry as he takes damage, and then like unleashes like a big attack and then goes back to like tanking again for you. And Bloody Mary is pretty high, pretty consistent damage, but it's a little bit hard to target with her sometimes. So let's begin. Okay, so this is the world map. So let's go over the UI really quickly. And again, if I don't know if I mentioned this, but this is an episode 0, so we're not going to get any like gameplay in really today. In this episode, we're just going to talk about everything. So, I mean, feel free to skip to episode 1 if you just want to hurry up and get to me progressing through the map and fighting stuff. So the UI, we have a lot of interesting things going on. There's terror up here. Now, terror is something that you can create as a choice when you're doing certain events and combats. And as your terror goes up, you will place beneficial alterations on the map nodes ahead of you. So you can cause terror, and then perhaps later on when you reach this spot, say here, maybe you'll get some extra currency because you scared people here, and that's like a cascading effect. So there's things like that where if you want positive additions to the nodes in front of you, you want to raise the terror. The other thing you can get through combat is souls. So these are your currency. This is just gold, essentially. This is you spend this. There's Grim Reaper nodes here, actually right here on the mini map. That's where you spend your souls to do a couple of different, a few different things actually, and we'll talk about those when we get there. We also have our Devil Diabolic Essence. So our characters are actually immortal. because anytime they would be killed, we instead auto-revive them using our demonic essence, diabolic essence. So if this ever drops to 0, the game's over. That's the run ends. So you have to be careful with that. So if you have a character that gets down to essentially 0 health, they enter a state of vulnerability. Like if you've played Darkest Dungeon, it's like they're on death's door, and they don't actually die until they receive 1 more hit. At that point, they are automatically revived with some health, and then you lose some essence. So you do have to be careful. You can't control that. So I did have a fight. The fight that ended my last run was an AoE that hit all 3 of my units twice and knocked them all out at the same time, and I lost all my remaining diabolic essence, and that was the run over. The game can be brutally hard. Here we have your spellbook. You can see our characters. If we have any positive or negative traits, we can see their health points, spirit damage, bonuses they have to types of damage. And then here are their social skills I was talking about. So the White Lady is pretty scary, pretty stealthy, pretty good at occultism, but she's not very good at temptation, and she's not very good at ruses. We can also flip on over to our other characters. So we have the Headless Horseman. We can also, set a leader so that when we're running around on the map, we just play as this character. It doesn't really matter. It's just for visual interest. So I may flip around a little bit just for fun. Here we have the Headless Horseman. You see he's got a little bit more health. He's the tank of the group. She's got more spirit points, though. And he's pretty scary, but he's not really fantastic at these 3 things. He's okay with ruse. And then we have Bloody Mary, who, again, is also quite scary and quite stealthy. So we have problems this game with temptation. Our highest is a 2. And ruse, our highest is a 4. Occult, our highest is a 4. So we have a little bit of problem with temptation is bad. Occultism and ruse are not great. So I have to watch out for those kind of events. So let's talk about the skills really quickly and how this works. So when we go into combat, we're going to have 5 action points every turn, every round, essentially. And once we've used all of those, we flip over to the enemies, and they each do whatever they're queued up to do. Like a lot of these games, the enemy intention is fairly well understood. They're going to say whether they're going to do a buff, a debuff, an attack, healing, something like that. You'll see little icons over their head depicting what they're going to be doing. But on your turn, when you're spending those action points, you have this as your skill loadout right here, basically. So these 3 have skills in them. These are empty slots. We can find additional skills or even duplicates of a skill and have more copies of it. And these are locked, and there is a way to unlock these during a run, which is generally, I would say the first one is kind of a no-brainer. You may not need the last slot. There is a cost to get these, so we'll talk about that when it comes up. But for the Headless Horseman, we have here, On Guard. Target self applies 1 provocation and 1 shell. And this game does a pretty good job with tooltips. I will say, a pro for the game, lots of tooltips. Everything explains what it does when you hover over it. Downside, there are a lot of these. There are a lot of things going on all the time. So in combat, somebody might have 4 or 5 of these buffs and debuffs on them, and you hover over them, you just get this huge block of text. And yes, they have icons and color coding, and that's great, fantastic, but still there's kind of a lot of information sometimes. So in this case, On Guard will be targeted by adversaries. Be careful not to use this trying to stop somebody from using AoE. It does not work, I promise. And it applies shell. So this reduces damage suffered by 4, and that's for both the health points and the spiritual points. So he taunts people onto him and then takes less damage. So this is a pretty standard tank type ability. He has here a slash. He does a little bit of damage and applies a bleeding. And you can see down there it says bleeding. After using this skill, the holder suffers... after using a skill, the holder suffers 5 to 8 HP per damage application. So if the enemy uses a skill on their turn, they bleed. It's like moving about too much with an open wound is causing them to bleed out. Rather than the bleed being just sort of a dot, just damage that just happens automatically, they have to use a skill to activate that bleed. And then we have here the Devouring Charge. This is only 1 action point for this one. You can see up in the top right of this box, slash costs 2, On Guard costs 2. Devouring Charge only costs 1, steals 9 to 14 health, 9 to 14 SP, But this is only usable if you have 5 bitterness, and bitterness is the special resource that the horseman has. So every time the horseman, says right down there, every time the Headless Horseman suffers damage, increase the charge by 1. So over time, as he's tanking, his bitterness goes up, and then he unleashes it with this pretty powerful attack that only costs 1 point, and also is able to heal himself back up. So he makes a pretty good tank. The only thing he can't help you with is AoE. Your team is quite vulnerable to AoE because you can't taunt AoE off of people, unfortunately. Now, once you've used your skills, they go on cooldown and they cannot be used again until refreshed. They do not do this automatically. You have to use a special skill, this big one at the end, and every character has a version of this. And so for him, it costs 1 action point. So remember that it does cost you action points to get your skills back. Target self, recharge skills, and apply 1 bitterness. So if you have 1 point left over on a turn and don't have anything to do with it, you can always just gain a bitterness point on him. You don't actually even need any skills to be on cooldown for him to use this. Every time he gets to 5 bitterness, you can use this attack. So it's pretty cool that you can sort of charge your bitterness up while recharging your skills with him. So he's a pretty interesting character. He can get some AoE attacks. He can get some self-damaging attacks that buff him that would then also apply bitterness to him. It's pretty cool. I also love the visual style of this character. They gave him, it's a little hard to tell, but this is a cavalry saber. He actually wears and uses a cavalry saber in combat because he's a horseman, which I think is really fantastic that they did that. He's also acts kind of like noble and like he's well trained and stuff because he was like a cavalryman. And then of course over time he increases his bitterness and goes kind of into a fit of rage and then destroys everything. So it's very thematic for him. Bloody Mary, who's my favorite character so far, she has stabbing. She has to target the character with the lowest HP, but this does a fair bit of damage. So that's 7 to 12 damage. This slash is also 7 to 12 and applies bleeding, but this upgrades pretty well, actually. Let's see how well this upgrades. Yeah, not quite as well, but it does give more bleeding. Mirror Blade here is 2 times 3 to 5 damage, so she'll attack twice, and that's very, very important, and we'll talk about that in combat. And she also has Twist of Fate. This is an alteration. Reduce the impending attack by 2. So whoever she targets with this will lower the damage that they're putting out. So if they're attacking a single target, it lowers it by 2. If they're attacking in an AoE, it's going to reduce it by 2 for everyone they hit. So this can be a big help when you're facing AoE. I don't know how I would get through some of the fights without this particular skill, to be honest. And then her reload is really, really cool. Cursed Mirror. Recharges Mary's skill, so she gets all of these back. Place the Cursed Mirror on the target. So she gets to pick a target when she used the Cursed Mirror. And then whenever she uses a skill, that effect is duplicated on the character with the mirror. So it's really cool. So you recharge your skills, put a mirror on either a target you're attacking or a different target. And then let's say you put it on the one you're already fighting. You just basically do this twice to them. So if I use stabbing on someone with the mirror, the mirror would duplicate it and they would get hit by this skill twice. Same with here. You could do 4 times 3 to 5 damage. Or you could put the Cursed Mirror on a separate target and use Twist of Fate and lower the damage output of 2 different units by a little bit. It's very, very cool ability. I love thematically, and then this little broken mirror appears behind them, and then whenever she does something, kind of energy sweeps out from that mirror and hits them. Really cool idea for that. She has a fair amount of she's kind of a hybrid, I would say. She's not very strong in defense. She's got low health and low spirit. But what she's good at is dishing out damage, and she can get damage to the health, and she can get a fair number of damage skills that affect spirit points. If you've played Darkest Dungeon, or honestly at this point, most roguelites that exist now, especially card battlers, there are 2 types of things you can hit people with. You can kill them by reducing their health to 0, or you can kill them by reducing their spirit points to 0. So there's 2 different styles to doing that. And some enemies will have a lot more health or spirit points, so that you can kind of strategize around that. Your early skills typically are only going to be one thing, but as we'll see, the White Lady has all spirit point type attacks. So we have here Dread, 3 to 5 SP, so very low amount of damage, but it only costs 1 point. So if you just need something to do, finish somebody off or something, that's a great skill for that. She looks like a cauliflower here. Here we have Possession, steal 6 to 10 SP, and apply 1 Exhaustion. So Exhaustion says reduces by half all of the damage inflicted. So that's fantastic. That's a big SP hit and a debuff that will lower their damage output. So that, with Bloody Mary's Twist of Fate, you could really knock somebody down. Plus, if this guy is taunting them and he takes less damage when he's doing that, you could probably take no damage from a lot of stuff with those 3 together. We also have here Torment. Put on the Mask of Torment, level 6. I'm not familiar with this yet. This is pretty new for me. I think the 6 is the points because it says down there Mask of Torment. At the end of the turn, inflicts 6 SP on a random enemy. So I'm guessing if Mask of Torment was, say, level 9, it would be 9 SP. But I'm not sure about that yet. Which triggers 1 time. So the Mask of Torment, at the end of your turn, will inflict 6 SP on a random enemy. And I think this stays on and continues to trigger 1 time per turn. I think that's what that means. And the reason I think that is because here, her intermission recharges her skills, trigger the effects of the masks she's currently wearing, and remove the mask. So I think that the mask probably continues to function while she has it on until you recharge, and then she takes it off, but you get one last use out of it, which is really cool. And I kind of took a look at some of the skills she can get, and there are a couple more masks you can get with her, so I think she can do a variety of different things with these masks, which seems pretty cool to me. So what else do we have going on in the UI? We have our quest here. There are no effects present in this zone. They would show up here. And we have the Claw of Garion, which is our quest here. So we can take a look over here at the map. So if you click on this... Oh, and by the way, when you launch the game, there is a tutorial, and definitely play that. The tutorial is stupid easy, but you really should do it. There's a lot of systems going on in this game. You really should do that, I think. So here on the map, we can see our standard node-based progression system in a roguelite. They all use this now. We can't even scroll all the way up. This is big. I don't know how big this map is, but I didn't even make it to the final boss in my last run, and I don't even know how many nodes I did. I think these are quite long runs. So we have here different combats. Now we can't move ahead until we do this. This will be like a story node. But once we do that, we can move on. So in each section of the map, there will be something with a ring around it like this, like a red fiery ring. You cannot leave the node until you've done that. Sometimes you will find one with like a bluish ring. That is an optional event, and you do not have to do that, but they're almost always something that you will want to do. Even if it's like a regular combat. One time I had an elite combat and I did not want to do that at the time. But most of the time it might be like a shop or an extra event or something like that. So they can be pretty nice. So once you do your event here, the map will sort of open up and show you your different ways you can go. In this case, we will have 3 options. They all lead to combat. So the only thing that matters here is choosing where we want to go afterwards. This here is random. This is a completely random, it could be any of these other types of nodes. I avoid these because why would I do this when I can know what I'm going to do and plan for it, I think, in my opinion. But, you know, maybe there's a time when you would want to do that. We also have here events. These are like little story missions where you'll take one of your characters in using these stats that we talked about, like scare, occultism, temptation. And depending on how high of these are, that impacts their chance of success. I think it's a 1-to-1 ratio, essentially, like out of 10. So a 6 scare means a 60% chance, essentially, as far as I can tell. So if you can get people, my last run I had Dracula, had 10 and everything. So he 100% succeeded everything all the time. It was great. So I always aimed for the event nodes as much as I could because I was guaranteed to succeed and get some free stuff. So event nodes are pretty fun. It usually involves tempting mortals into doing evil things, which is quite fun. We have here the Grim Reaper. This is our shop. The Grim Reaper also does something really cool in this game where you can give him one of your skills from your bar. He takes it away from you and you don't have it. And then the next time you come back, he will give it back to you, but upgraded. And you can see over here on the left under evolutions, On Guard right now is the basic level. At the next level, it would do 2 provocation, 2 shell instead of 1 and 1. So that's a pretty cool upgrade. So, you know, if you encounter the Grim Reaper and you have skills that you don't feel like are 100% necessary or kind of weak right now, you can give them to him. And next time you meet him, you'll get it back even better than before. Up here, we have an elite combat. We have more combat here. This is a Styx fountain. This is where you can purge negative effects from your characters if you have them, or if you've spent your Diabolic Essence. You can gain Diabolic Essence from that. Typically, I think it's like 20 or 30 you get per well, so you got to be a little careful with this. We also have a Sacrificial Altar. This is where you can sacrifice a skill from one of your character's bars to discover a new skill of that same rank. But you also get a new skill slot. But you have to be very careful with that, because any skill that you sacrifice, you will not find anymore in the run. So if I sacrifice Slash and get a new skill of this rarity, I will not find Slash skills for the rest of the run. You have to be very careful that whatever you sacrifice is something you don't care about seeing again in this particular run. I do not know enough about that yet to know what's good and what's bad, but there are certainly things that I've picked up that I was like, this doesn't really work anyway, so I'll just sacrifice it and get something better. What else do we have on here? We have more book chapters, so they'll always lead back to the book chapters because that progresses the story. And I think that's all of the nodes. Yeah, and then there will be like a final boss of some kind at the end of this chapter. So those are all the different kinds of nodes and stuff that you'll find on the map. Yeah, here it is. Final combat has this like dungeon symbol. All right, and then the last thing I want to talk about is the devil mode. So the devil mode, I kind of don't want to spoil the surprise of it. I want to wait until I'm in a combat. So I'm going to leave you on a bit of a cliffhanger with that one for this episode. Now, there is some stuff I can do with this on the world map, but it's not quite as shocking as some of the things you can do in a combat. So let's call this one here. I will come back on the next episode. That'll be our episode 1, where we'll actually start progressing. We'll do this story event, and then we'll head up to a combat, and I'll explain how the combat works. I've talked about most of it already, so mostly we'll just be actually doing it, and I'll show you what the devil mode does. So thank everybody so much for watching. I hope you will consider liking and subscribing. I would really appreciate it. Please come on back for episode 2 so I can show you how to cheat in this game, which is part of it, and it's super fun. And I will see you in the next episode. Thanks again.